the only real thing he had. The morning of Daniel's funeral, I chose the gray dress. Not black. I had read somewhere years ago that widows who wear gray instead of black appear more composed, more capable of holding themselves together in a room full of people who are watching to see how you fall apart. I wanted to be dignified. I needed to be dignified because the alternative was to stay curled on the bathroom floor where I had spent most of the previous night. And I had already made that choice once, and it had not helped. So I put on the gray dress. I put on the pearl earrings Daniel had given me on our 3rd anniversary, small, perfect, cold against my earlobes, and I practiced in the mirror above the sink the expression of composed grief. Quiet eyes, jaw not clenched, a kind of patient devastation. I had been practicing not making a scene for 6 years. She walked in at 11:14. I remember the time because I had been staring at the clock above the funeral home's entrance, trying to count the minutes until it was over, trying to calculate how many more handshakes and murmured condolences I would need to absorb before I could go home and take off the gray dress and never put it on again. The Lassiter and Webb funeral home smelled of lilies and the particular kind of forced warmth that comes from climate control set slightly too high for comfort, and the organist, a small woman with silver hair, was playing something soft and unidentifiable. I was standing near the entrance to the main hall, receiving people, the way you do, with Daniel's mother Eleanor to my left and his college friend Marcus to my right, and both of them radiating something I had not yet identified as guilt. And then the door opened. She was wearing a cream-colored blouse and dark slacks, and she had a little boy on her hip, 4 years old, maybe 5, dark-haired, round-faced, with the particular set of the jaw that I had kissed every morning for 6 years and called my husband. It was Daniel's jaw, Daniel's dark eyes, Daniel's slight frown of concentration. The child was looking around the room with the bewildered gravity that small children put on in places where adults are crying. And beside me, I felt Eleanor Mercer go very, very still. The woman, the one carrying the boy who had my husband's face, was crying. Not the composed, practiced grief I had arranged on my own face that morning. She was crying the way people cry when the bottom drops out of everything they thought they understood. I knew that crying. I had been doing it alone in my car for 4 days. And I understood before I understood anything else, before I understood who she was, or what her name was, or what any of it meant, I understood that we were the same kind of wrecked. But let me go back to the beginning, because the beginning matters, and because I have spent 8 months now understanding how beginnings can lie. I met Daniel Mercer at a work event, not mine, his. My colleague Pauline had dragged me to a sales industry awards dinner at a hotel downtown, the kind of event where everyone wears name tags and drinks too quickly and exchanges business cards they will never use. I was 32, working as a paralegal at Stanton & Reed Family Law, and I had spent that entire year submerged in other people's marital disasters, other people's hidden assets, their secret accounts, their double lives discovered through a credit card statement or an unexplained Saturday. I came home from work every day carrying the residue of it. I sometimes wondered if I had developed a kind of professional immunity to romantic trust. And then Daniel Mercer sat down beside me at the bar because the event had run out of chairs and he had nowhere else to go. And he apologized for the inconvenience with such genuine, self-deprecating charm that I laughed before I had decided to. He was regional sales manager for a medical equipment company. He traveled Monday through Thursday, home every weekend, good money, easy manner. 40 years old, which at the time seemed like a comfortable, settled sort of age. He asked good questions and listened to the answers. He remembered the name of my sister's cat when I mentioned it in passing. He had the Seiko watch my father used to wear, and when I said so, he looked at it with genuine affection and said his grandfather had given it to him and he never took it off. We dated for 14 months. We got married on a Saturday in October at a small venue outside the city with 43 guests and an open bar and Renee Castle, my closest friend, crying so hard during the vows that she knocked her champagne glass off the table when she went for a tissue. I have a photograph of that moment. Renee, half laughing, half crying, champagne spreading across the linen, and in it you can see Daniel's face, turned toward the sound, and he is genuinely, openly delighted. I have looked at that photograph many times in the last 8 months. I still cannot decide whether the delight was real. We bought a house in Harwick, a suburb 40 minutes from the city. 3 bedrooms, a garden I never had time for, a kitchen Daniel loved because it had a gas range, and he was a competent and enthusiastic Sunday cook. The neighborhood had a quiet, established feel. Older maples on the block, neighbors who waved from their driveways. We were not the young couple doing everything for the first time. We were people who had made deliberate choices and were now living inside them. That distinction mattered to us, or at least it mattered to me. I thought it mattered to Daniel. He traveled for work from Monday through Thursday, every week, reliably. He packed his suitcase on Sunday evenings with a tidiness I had always found quietly touching. Folded shirts, pairs of shoes and cloth bags, the Seiko watch removed last and placed in the front pocket of the bag where he could find it easily in a hotel room. He called every night he was away, always between 8 and 9, always for 15 to 20 minutes, long enough to feel present, short enough to be plausible. He brought things back from wherever he had been, a bottle of local hot sauce from Nashville, a particular brand of coffee from Seattle, once a very ugly ceramic bowl from a market in Phoenix that he said reminded him of something I had mentioned wanting. I kept the bowl on the kitchen counter for 4 years. When I sold the house, I left it behind, which was not a decision exactly, more like a refusal to carry it further. That was established fact before we married. I worked long hours. Family law does not respect the clock, and I was often at the office until 7 or 8, which meant the empty house from Sunday night to Thursday night was less lonely than it might otherwise have been. On Friday evenings, he came home, and we had a standing ritual. I cooked or ordered in, we opened a bottle of something decent, and we talked about the week. He was a good talker. He asked about my cases, not in the case-specific way that would have been a privacy violation, but in the atmospheric way. What kind of week had it been? What kind of people had I been dealing with? How was I holding up under the weight of other people's disasters? He made me feel seen. That is the part I cannot stop turning over in my hands. He made me feel seen by someone who was performing the act of seeing while simultaneously maintaining an entirely parallel existence 40 miles away. I should note here, because I think it matters, that I am a paralegal specializing in family law. I spend my working life inside the documentation of deception. I read financial disclosures and find the hidden accounts. I cross-reference travel records and identify the gaps. I have helped women unravel exactly this kind of architecture, this precise combination of compartmentalization and charm. I have sat across the conference table from women who said, "I should have known." I told them, "You couldn't have known." What I did not understand yet was how completely, how architecturally, how deliberately a person could be hidden from you while appearing to be entirely present. The Saturday Running Club had been Renee's idea, 3 years into my marriage to Daniel, when she had decided we were both becoming sedentary, and was not wrong. There were 4 of us, Renee, me, Donna Briggs from 2 streets over, and Beth Orland and Marguerite Wells from the neighborhood further east. We met at 6:30 at the park's south entrance, ran the 5-mile loop, and then went to the Sunrise Grill on Mallory Street for eggs and coffee, and in Marguerite's case, a large glass of orange juice that she maintained was medicinal. We had been doing this every Saturday for 3 years. It was the most reliable and honest part of my week. Renee is, my closest friend. The kind of person you have known long enough that silence between you is comfortable, and conversation is effortless, and there is no version of any crisis she would not wade into alongside you without being asked. She worked in HR at a financial services company and had the particular combination of hard-headed practicality and genuine warmth that made her excellent at her job and an almost supernaturally useful person to have in your corner. She also swore with the frequency and fluency of someone who had made a considered lifestyle choice. I loved her for all of it. She was the first person I called when Daniel died. He died on a Monday evening in February. He was driving back from what he had told me was a client meeting in Westfield, a 2-hour drive, and a truck ran a red light on Route 9 and hit his car on the driver's side. He died at the scene. The state trooper who came to my door at 11:30 that night was a young woman with careful eyes and practiced gentleness, and she told me what had happened in the precise, ordered way people are trained to deliver impossible information. And I sat down on the front steps because my legs made the decision before my brain did, and I remember the cold of the concrete through the gray dress I was wearing. The same gray dress, it turned out, that I would wear to his funeral 4 days later, because I could not think clearly enough to choose another one, and it was the first thing I put my hand on in the closet. The trooper waited with me until Renee arrived. She was young enough that the situation visibly cost her something. She stood a few feet away, hands behind her back, not intruding, but not leaving. And I appreciated that more than I could say at the time, the quality of her presence. When Renee pulled up and came up the walk and took one look at my face and said nothing, just sat down beside me on the steps, the trooper gave us a card with a number and left quietly. I would never see her again. I have thought about her occasionally, about what it costs a person, accumulating other people's worst moments the way her job required. I called Renee at midnight. She was at my door by 12:40, still in her coat, and she made tea and sat with me on the kitchen floor because I could not make myself go to the couch. And she did not say anything stupid, which is the specific gift of someone who knows you well enough to know when words are useless. The 4 days between Daniel's death and his funeral were the strangest of my life. Not the worst, because the worst was still coming, though I had no idea of it yet. They had the quality of water, shapeless, cold, slightly hard to breathe through. Eleanor Mercer came over the morning after, composed and dry-eyed, in a way that I thought at the time was strength, and now understand differently. She sat in my kitchen and drank my coffee and helped make calls to the funeral home, to Daniel's office, to relatives. She knew what to do. She moved through the practical apparatus of death with an efficiency that I found comforting. I did not yet have the information that would reframe her efficiency as something else entirely. There was a phone call on the second day that I did not answer, an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. When I listened to the message, later, much later, while making a list of people to notify, it was a woman's voice, brief and slightly strangled, saying, I'm sorry, I'm calling about Daniel. If you could please call me back?" No name, no callback number visible. I wrote, "Unknown, follow-up," in the margin of my list and moved on, because I was in the middle of the kind of grief that narrows your world to its immediate tasks, and following up on an unidentified caller felt like something that could wait. It was Natalie. Of course it was Natalie. She had found my cell number through some avenue I still don't fully understand. A mutual connection of Daniel's, probably. Someone else who knew more than they were saying. And she had tried to reach me, and I had let it ring. I have thought about that voicemail many times. Whether the conversation we would have had I called back, would have been better or worse than the one we eventually had. Whether preparation is a kindness or just a different shape of the same wound. I don't know. I know that on the morning of the funeral, I did not know her name, and that I walked into Lassiter and Webb with 43 guests and Eleanor and Marcus and my gray dress and my practiced expression, and that at 11:14 the door opened and my life split cleanly in two. Her name was Natalie Cross. She had been calling herself Natalie Mercer for 3 years, on Facebook, in casual conversation, in the way she introduced herself to Daniel's colleagues at the Christmas party she attended in December, while I attended a different one in a different city, believing my husband was away on a client dinner. She was 34, dark-haired, with the kind of careful stillness that comes from having rehearsed composure the same way I had. And she had a son named Oliver, who was 4 years and 3 months old, and who had, in the precise vocabulary of genetics, his father's face. I did not know any of this yet when she walked through the door. I knew only that she was there, and that Eleanor had gone rigid beside me, and that the specific quality of Eleanor's stillness, controlled, unsurprised, guilty, told me something had already been decided, somewhere above me, and I was the last to find out. Natalie walked toward the front of the room. She walked the way people walk at funerals, slowly, with her eyes on the coffin, one hand on Oliver's back. Several of Daniel's relatives were watching her. Most of them had the look of people who know a secret and have agreed not to be the one who says it. I walked toward her. I don't know exactly why. Some reflex of authority, of being the wife in the room, the one who had a right to be there that exceeded anyone else's. Or perhaps simply the instinct of someone who has spent their career identifying the shape of what is being hidden and moving toward it rather than away. She saw me when she was about 10 feet away. She stopped walking. The organist, for reasons of her own, chose that moment to pause and adjust her sheet music. The room went quiet in the specific way that rooms go quiet when something is about to happen and everyone senses it. We looked at each other. She had tears still tracking through the makeup at the corners of her eyes. Oliver looked from her face to mine with the unreadable attention of a 4-year-old who knows something is wrong but does not yet have the language for it. He was wearing a small navy blazer that was slightly too long in the sleeves. Daniel's sleeves had always been slightly too long. "Who are you?" I said, which is not what I had meant to say. I had meant to say something composed. "With I'm his wife," she said. The room, which had been quietly watching, went quieter. I heard, from somewhere to my right, Marcus say, "Oh, Christ." "His wife is standing in front of you," I said. She blinked. Something crossed her face. Not shock exactly, because there was recognition in it. The recognition of a person who has just heard the specific sentence they had been both dreading and expecting. "He told me he was divorced," she said. "He told me the paperwork was done." The thing about a room when everything in it shifts is that there is always a moment of acoustic dissonance, sound continuing when it probably shouldn't, silence appearing where it shouldn't. The organist had begun playing again, softly, something that might have been a hymn or might have been filler while she figured out what to do. Oliver had buried his face against his mother's neck. Eleanor Mercer had not moved. Marcus was staring at a spot on the floor. I opened my mouth to say something else. I have no idea what. And then Daniel's phone went off. He had been placed in the coffin in the suit he was wearing when he died, cleaned and mended, the funeral home had explained, restored as much as possible. His phone, apparently, had been in the inside breast pocket. The funeral home had not thought to check. Or perhaps they had checked and not found it because it was powered down when they prepared him, and some combination of residual battery and the warmth of the room had revived it. Or perhaps the universe simply has a theatrical sensibility and understood that this was the moment. What we heard, all of us, the 43 guests and the organist and the funeral director who had appeared in the doorway and frozen, was Daniel's voice. His actual voice, recorded, warm and easy, with the slightly self-conscious softness he used when he was being sincere about something. It had the quality of a message left on a quiet Sunday. Hey, baby, happy anniversary. 3 years. I cannot believe it's 3 years. You're the most real thing in my life. You know that? I just wanted you to hear me say it out loud. The message ended. There was a notification sound. Then silence. Natalie Cross let out a single sound, not a word, not quite a cry, something in between, and sat down in the nearest chair. Oliver climbed into her lap and patted her face with both hands, the way small children do when they know something is wrong and have decided that contact is the solution. Several guests were staring at the coffin as though it might say something further. The organist had stopped completely and was looking at her sheet music with the focused attention of someone very deliberately not looking at anything else. Marcus said, to no one in particular, flatly, the sound of a man whose story has finally run out. Well, there it is. I turned and looked at Eleanor Mercer. She was looking at me. Her expression was composed, and it was that composure, not guilt, not horror, not even surprise, just the composure of a person who had been holding a weight and had now put it down, that told me everything I needed to know about how long she had known. I did not make a scene. I want to be accurate about that because I had promised myself I wouldn't, and I kept the promise. I turned back to the room. I arranged my face. I asked the funeral director in a quiet voice whether we could proceed, and he said yes, and we did. We got through the service. I stood where I was supposed to stand and accepted condolences from people whose expressions ranged from genuine sorrow to the controlled discomfort of those who had known and said nothing. I did not look at Natalie again until the service ended, when I walked directly out without speaking to anyone, got into my car, and sat in the parking lot for 37 minutes until my hands stopped shaking enough to drive. I did not cry. That was the strange part. The crying had all been used up in the 4 days before, on the ordinary grief, the grief I thought I understood. What I felt sitting in that parking lot was not grief exactly. It was something more clinical, more investigative. It was the feeling I sometimes got at the start of a difficult case, when you open the file and see the shape of something enormous that has not yet been fully mapped. The feeling of a puzzle spread across a table, pieces everywhere, and the creeping certainty that when it is finally assembled, you are not going to recognize the picture. I went home. The house was quiet, the way houses go quiet when the person who animated them is no longer coming back. I had been living in that quiet for 4 days and had begun to understand it as the silence of loss. I would later understand it differently, as the silence of a story whose ending you did not yet know. I stood in the kitchen for a long time. I made coffee and did not drink it. I went through the refrigerator and threw away the things that had passed their date. I straightened the stack of mail on the counter. I was doing what I always do when I am trying not to think yet, which is to organize the immediate physical environment until my brain is ready. Then I went to the garage. The reason I went to the garage was practical and mundane. I was trying to find Daniel's gym membership card. It was in his wallet, I thought, or possibly in the gym bag he kept in the garage. The gym had called that afternoon with a message about his account, and I had decided, in the way you make small decisions when big ones are impossible, that I would deal with the membership before I dealt with anything else. The gym bag was on the shelf above the second set of hooks, beside the camping gear we had used exactly once 3 years ago. I found the gym membership card in the front pocket. In the main compartment, folded inside a pair of workout shorts, I found a phone. It was a Samsung, not Daniel's usual iPhone, which had been returned to me with his other personal effects. This was smaller, darker. The screen cracked slightly at the corner. The kind of phone that has been used carefully, but not carefully enough. I stood holding it for a long moment. The garage was cold. The fluorescent light above me buzzed at a frequency that had always mildly annoyed me, and which I had never asked Daniel to fix, because somehow there was always something more important. The phone was not password protected. That was the first thing I registered. The first small piece that did not fit. Because Daniel was careful about passwords, meticulous about them, had a different one for every account, had encouraged me to do the same. A second phone with no password. A phone kept hidden inside a gym bag, inside workout shorts. I pressed the home button. The screen lit up. The most recent text conversation was with a contact labeled simply N. The most recent message in that conversation was from 3 months ago. Miss you. Oliver asked where Daddy was again. I told him you were on a work trip. He accepted this. I didn't. The message before that was from Daniel. I'll be there Thursday, I promise. Tell him Daddy's bringing a surprise. I sat down on the garage floor. The concrete was cold through the fabric of my dress, the gray dress I had not yet taken off. I sat there and I scrolled back through the conversation, which went back 3.5 years, and I read what was there, and what was there was the daily texture of a life. Good morning messages and good night messages, arguments about small domestic things, a conversation about Oliver's fever that lasted 2 hours, a fight in August of the previous year that took 4 days to resolve, photographs of Oliver at the beach, at a birthday party, losing his first tooth. A family, not a secret, not an affair, a family, complete with its rhythms and its conflicts and its ordinary accumulations. I did not feel sick. I want to be accurate. I did not feel sick. What I felt was a kind of architectural shift, the sensation of the ground beneath a very large building settling in a way the building's designer had not accounted for. Everything I was standing on had just moved by a very precise and catastrophic amount, and the structure above me was intact, but nothing was where it had been. I sat on the garage floor and scrolled back to the beginning of the conversation, 3.5 years ago. Daniel's first message to N. I know this is complicated. I know I'm asking a lot, but I need you to trust me. I'm handling things on my end. N's response. Handling things meaning what exactly? Daniel. Meaning I'm doing what I told you I'd do. Give me 6 months. She had given him 3.5 years. He had never finished handling things. I called Renee at 9:17 that evening. She picked up on the second ring with the slight roughness of someone who has been waiting. Claire, are you okay? With a steadiness that surprised both of us. I need you to come over. I need you to bring coffee because I've made some and can't drink it. And I need someone to look at something with me. A pause. How bad is it? After a moment. I'll tell you when you get here. She arrived in 18 minutes, which meant she had not changed out of whatever she was wearing and had possibly run 2 red lights. She came in through the back door. She had a key from years ago, maintained on the principle that someone should always be able to get in an emergency, and found me at the kitchen table with the Samsung in front of me and a legal pad on which I had been writing down names and dates. She sat down. She looked at the phone and the legal pad. She looked at my face. Jesus Christ, she said. Yeah. How long have you been sitting here? 3 hours, give or take. She got up, poured herself a cup of the coffee I had made, sat back down and said, Tell me all of it. I told her all of it. The funeral, the woman, the child, the auto-sent voice message, Eleanor's face, the phone in the gym bag, 3.5 years of text messages, the name Oliver, which I had never heard Daniel say. Renee listened without interrupting, which is unusual for her and is, I have learned, her specific form of respect for an impossible situation. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, with a quality that was not quite anger and not quite awe, he was juggling 2 complete families for 6 years of your marriage. And his mother knew. She knew. It's in the messages. He texts N, Natalie, about Mom says hi, about Eleanor babysitting Oliver when he was at our place. Holy shit. I process divorce filings for a living. I spent last October helping a woman in exactly this situation find the hidden accounts. I typed the document. Renee looked at me for a moment with the precise expression of someone who has decided that the most useful thing she can do right now is not say what she is thinking. Gently, which was harder for her than it looked. Claire, listen to me. This is not about what you know professionally. Nobody looks at their own life the way they look at a file. With a sharpness she hadn't meant to show. I should have. You shouldn't have had to. We sat with that for a moment. I want to know who else knew, I said. I want to know every person who saw this and chose to keep their mouth shut. Nodding with the particular Renee Castle quality of recognizing when a plan is forming. Okay, how are we doing that? Very carefully and very thoroughly. Renee picked up her coffee cup, looked at it, put it down. She said, with the dark humor she deployed in serious situations, Can I just say, for the record, before we get methodical and legal and professionally devastating, can I say that what he did is the most spectacular piece of bullshit I have ever encountered in my 40 years on this earth? 2 families, Monday through Thursday on one side, weekend on the other. Did he ever actually go on a work trip? With a short, airless laugh that surprised me. I genuinely don't know. Does his company know? That's a good question. Is it possible his company was covering for him? Like, were they actually scheduling him so he had an alibi? I don't think so. I think he scheduled his travel himself, used the autonomy of the role. His manager was in another state. Okay, I mean, the logistics alone, the sheer... She stopped. You know what? Let's save the grudging respect for after we've destroyed him legally. Continue. He's dead, Renee. Then we destroy what he built, which is still there. The structure is still there, and that structure hurt you. She was right about the structure. I had been thinking about the structure because Daniel Mercer, regional sales manager, apparently careful, apparently organized, his hidden life had not been maintained on charm alone. Charm is personal. It does not maintain itself. What maintained it was something more systemic, and I had spent my career watching systemic things get disassembled once you knew where to put your hands. The next morning was Saturday. We did not run. I texted Donna and Beth and Marguerite, a brief, carefully worded message. Something's come up. Not running today. I'll explain soon. I'm okay. Within 6 minutes, I had received 3 responses of varying lengths, all of which communicated the same essential thing. We're here, wherever you are. Marguerite, who was the most measured of us, sent a single line. Sunrise Grill, 9 a.m. if you want us there. I sent back, yes. Renee drove us. The Sunrise Grill on Mallory Street had the quality of a place that had survived 30 years by not changing anything. The same laminate menus, the same particular orange of the vinyl booths, the same waitress named Peg, who had been there long enough to know all our orders by heart, and who set Renee's black coffee and my wheat toast in front of us before we had sat down. Donna and Beth and Marguerite were already in the corner booth. They looked at me with the specific attention of people who do not yet know what they're looking at, but know it's serious. I told them. Donna put down her fork in the middle of a bite of scrambled egg and did not pick it up again. Beth said, "Oh my God," 3 times. Marguerite listened until I was done, then said, "What do you need from us?" Which is what Marguerite always asked. It was the right question. Honestly, I need you to tell me if I'm being crazy. I need someone outside my own head to confirm that what I'm reading is what I think it is. You're not being crazy, Donna said. You're being the opposite of crazy. What's the plan, legally speaking? He had a will. We did it together 3 years ago with an attorney in the city. I'm the sole beneficiary, but, she stopped. But I need to look at whether he moved assets in the last 3 years, whether there are accounts I don't know about, whether there's property. Beth looked up. Like a house? Like a house. The table went quiet. Peg came back and refilled coffee without being asked, in the way of a woman who has learned to read rooms. Are you going to talk to her? The other woman? I don't know yet. I think I need to know more before I do that. I think she's as screwed as you are. I think she didn't know either. I know. I know she didn't. I paused. That's part of what makes it complicated. What Renee understood that I hadn't fully processed yet was this. The woman at the funeral, Natalie Cross, had not been the one who built the lie. She had been inside it, the same way I had. We were both the contents of a structure we had not designed. The architect was in a coffin at Lassiter and Webb, and his mother was in a house on Cranberry Road, and his college friend Marcus was wherever Marcus had gone after the service, and none of them had said a word. I went to Eleanor's house on the following Tuesday. It was a white colonial on Cranberry Road, 15 minutes from the house Daniel and I had shared. I had been there perhaps 40 times over 6 years, for holidays, for dinners, for the annual Easter gathering that Eleanor hosted with meticulous performative warmth. I had always found her slightly formal, slightly evaluating, the kind of woman who gives you the impression that her approval has been withheld, without ever explaining the criteria. I had interpreted this as personality. I was reinterpreting it now. She came to the door in a pale blue sweater and reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and for a moment her expression was the ordinary expression of a woman who has lost her son and is being visited by his widow, And there was real sorrow in it. I believe the sorrow was genuine. And then she saw the way I was looking at her, and something shifted. She stepped back to let me in. We sat in her living room, which smelled of the candle she always burned, cedar and something botanical. She offered tea. I said no. She settled into the chair across from me with the particular composure of someone who has rehearsed this conversation in their head and is not going to be the one who flinches first. "I know why you're here," she said. "Good. Then I don't need to explain." A pause. She smoothed the fabric of her sweater across her knee. "He loved you. I need you to know that. What he had with you was real, with an edge that I kept controlled. What he had with me was real, and what he had with Natalie and Oliver was also real. And I suppose in whatever conversation we're about to have, you're going to tell me that you were simply trying to protect everyone, which is the sentence people say when they've decided that lying is an act of kindness." Eleanor was quiet. "How long did you know?" Another pause. She was looking at her hands. Finally, with the quiet of someone who has made a decision about honesty. "From the beginning. Almost from the beginning. He told me when—" She stopped. "He told me when Natalie was pregnant." The cold thing that settled over me in that moment was not surprise. It was confirmation, which is its own specific temperature. Quietly, each word very clear. "Your grandchild was born 4 years ago. Oliver." 4.5 years of knowing this existed, and you sat in my kitchen every Christmas and said nothing. With a tremble she did not manage to fully suppress. "I didn't know how to." Cutting through, still even. "I process divorce cases for a living. I work with women who have been in exactly this situation. I have sat across from women who said they should have seen it coming, and I have told them that they couldn't have known. And the reason they couldn't have known is that people around them, people who should have said something, chose not to. You were one of those people. For 4.5 years, you were one of those people in my kitchen, at my table." The silence that followed that was different from the one before it. It had weight. Eleanor pressed her lips together. She said, very low, in a voice that had genuinely cracked, "I was trying to keep everyone together." In a tone that surprised even me, not anger, colder than anger. "You were keeping Daniel comfortable. That's different." I left her house 20 minutes later after she had confirmed several things I needed confirmed. That she had been to Natalie's home, that she knew Oliver's name and birthday, that Daniel had asked her once to watch Oliver when he brought me for a long weekend to his mother's house, a weekend I remembered, a warm September, Eleanor's spare bedroom with the quilted bedspread. Oliver had apparently been left with a neighbor that time. The logistics of it, laid out plainly, had the clean, terrible logic of a well-run system. Before I left, I asked one more question. I had been deciding whether to ask it since I arrived, and I decided that I needed to know, not for the legal proceedings, not for Joan and Paige and the settlement, but for myself, for the part of me that was still trying to understand. Looking at her directly. Did he ever say he was going to stop? Did he ever tell you he wanted to end one of them? Eleanor was quiet for so long that I thought she was not going to answer. Finally, very low, he said, once, when Oliver was born. He said it had to change, that it wasn't fair to anyone. He said he was going to... She stopped. He said he was going to figure it out. After a moment, and then he didn't. And then he didn't. I looked at her. She looked like what she was, an old woman who had loved a complicated son and made a long series of wrong decisions in service of that love, and who was now living in the particular country those decisions had built. I did not feel sorry for her, but I registered that she was there, in it, the same way the rest of us were in it, with less excuse, but genuine consequence. At the door, turning back once. I'm going to make sure Oliver is taken care of. That's not conditional on anything you do or don't do going forward. I want you to know that. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully read. Simply leaving. Goodbye, Eleanor. I drove home. I sat in the driveway for 10 minutes. Then I went inside and opened my laptop and began to do what I did professionally, applied to my own life. This is the part where being a paralegal mattered, not because I had any special legal powers unavailable to a regular person. I didn't. But because I knew exactly where to look and what I was looking for, and because I had done this enough times that the process was not overwhelming. It was familiar. It was the most familiar part of any of this. I started with the financial records. Joint accounts first. Nothing unusual there. Spending patterns consistent, savings healthy. But Daniel had always managed the taxes himself, had always said he liked to, had assured me more than once that he had a system. I had let this go because I had my own work and trusted him, which I now understood had been the intended outcome of several gentle, strategic conversations about division of household labor. He had filed joint taxes with me. He had also, I discovered, filed separately under a business entity, DM Consulting, LLC, registered in the state 3.5 years ago, right around the time Natalie's pregnancy would have been visible. DM Consulting had a business address, an address in Milford, 40 miles from our house, 20 miles from the suburb where Natalie lived. I searched the address. It came up as a residential property, a 3-bedroom house in a development called Clearwater Estates. The property was owned by DM Consulting, LLC. I looked up the property tax records. They were paid on time, every year, from DM Consulting's account. Utilities were registered to DM Consulting. The assessed value was $287,000. I sat with this for a long time. He had bought a house. He had bought a house for her. He had registered it through a shell company so it would not appear in any joint financial search, and he had maintained it for 3.5 years, which meant, I did the math, somewhere between $12,000 and $15,000 a year in mortgage, insurance, and utilities, coming from revenue that DM Consulting reported as consulting income, which Daniel had shown me the general outlines of once as extra side project money, nothing too exciting. I had not asked for details. He had not offered them. The architecture of a lie is built from both its active components and its passive ones. The things the deceiver does and the questions the deceived does not ask. I had not asked. I had trusted. I had trusted because I had married him and because he was good at being trusted. I thought, sitting at my kitchen table with the property records on one screen and the LLC incorporation documents on the other, about a conversation we had had 2 years into the marriage. We had been talking about a couple we knew, friends of Donna's who had discovered after 12 years that the husband had a gambling problem and had concealed it with methodical, sustained creativity. The wife had been devastated, not just by the debt, but by the documentation, by the careful ledger of deception, the amount of planning it had required. I remember saying that it scared me more than an impulsive mistake would have. That deliberate dishonesty, the planned kind, required a person to look at you every day and choose, actively, to maintain the lie, to make the decision again every single morning. Daniel had nodded. He had said that made sense. He had said he thought the worst betrayals were the ones that required effort, because effort implied knowing what you were doing. He had been describing himself. He had nodded and agreed and described himself, and I had thought I was having a conversation with my husband about someone else. I found the bank account for DM Consulting the following day. It required some navigation, but the LLC's incorporation documents were public record. The account information was connected to those records, and I had enough working knowledge of financial document retrieval to know which databases to use. The account had been opened 3.5 years ago with an initial deposit of $40,000. In the subsequent years, consistent deposits of between $5,000 and $8,000 per month, consistent with Daniel's bonus structure at his company, which ran quarterly. Consistent with a salary supplemented by expense account manipulation. I did not know the exact mechanism yet. I would know it later when his company's HR department, contacted by his estate attorney, began to review his expense records and found a pattern of inflated client entertainment claims going back 4 years. What I knew, sitting in my kitchen on a Thursday morning with 2 laptops open and the Mercer family's financial skeletons spread across my screen, was this. He had spent more on maintaining the second life than on investing in ours. This was not a calculation I had intended to make, but once made, it would not unmake itself. The text from the unknown number arrived at 9:15 that same morning. I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I don't blame you, but I think I have things that belong to you, and I think you might have things that belong to me. And I'm trying to figure out what the right thing to do is. Nen. I stared at the text for a moment. Then I replied, Thursday, 11 a.m., Sunrise Grill on Mallory. I'll be in the corner booth. But before that Thursday, before the meeting with Natalie that I was already dreading and somehow also needing, there was the evening of the following Tuesday when I found Tiffany. I was going through Daniel's second phone systematically, not randomly as I had been the first night, but methodically, the way I would approach an evidence review at work. I had made a log. I was cross-referencing dates against our joint calendar, against my own memories of specific weekends and evenings and Thursday nights that he had been, according to his account, on the road or at client dinners or in airports. The mapping exercise was grim and informative. In the contacts, under T, was a name, Tiffany M. The contact had a Portland, Oregon area code. The text history with Tiffany M. went back 2 years. It was less domestic than the conversation with Natalie. Fewer logistics, more weekend plans, more of the light, breezy register of something in its early stages. Daniel had told her, it appeared, that he was working through a complicated situation at home and was not in a position to commit fully right now. Tiffany had found this frustrating, had said so several times, had received reassurances, had continued anyway. She had visited him once in the city at a hotel over a weekend he had told me was a work conference. The hotel receipt was, I would later discover, on the DM Consulting Amex. I called the number at 7 in the evening, Oregon time, 4 in the afternoon. She answered on the third ring. Hello? My name is Claire Holloway. I'm calling about Daniel Mercer. A pause. Okay. Is he all right? He passed away 2 weeks ago. I'm his wife. A longer pause. I could hear in the background the faint sound of traffic and what might have been a radio. His wife. His legal wife, yes. We were married 6 years. The pause this time lasted long enough that I thought she might have hung up. Finally, with a strange, exhausted precision, as though reading from a script she had not expected to use, he told me he was single. He said he hadn't been in a serious relationship in years. With a tiredness I no longer had the energy to disguise. I know. He told Natalie he was divorced. Who's Natalie? That's a longer conversation. Are you somewhere you can talk? We talked for 47 minutes. I have thought about that conversation often in the months since. The quality of it, the strange, bureaucratic calm with which we exchanged information. Two women comparing receipts on an account neither of us had authorized. Tiffany Marsh was 29, a graphic designer, lived alone in Portland, had been seeing Daniel for 2 years with the understanding that he was working himself up to something more committed. She was not angry at me. I was not angry at her. We were both just assembling the picture, laying piece after piece on the table, watching it become something neither of us had ordered. When I hung up, I sat for a long time in the same chair where I had been sitting when I found her name in the contacts. The house was very quiet around me. Outside, it had started to snow, the late February kind, wet and heavy, settling without enthusiasm on the bushes outside the kitchen window. 3 women. He had not built 2 lives. He had built compartments, sealed, separate, each one maintained with the precise application of time and money and charm and the strategic use of other people's willingness not to ask questions. And in each compartment, a woman who believed she was the real one, who had been given enough of him to believe that the rest of him was accounted for. The genius of it, if you could call it that, was not in the deception itself, but in the architecture. Each compartment complete enough that no one inside it was hungry for more. I called Renee. She arrived in less time than it should have taken, brought wine instead of coffee this time, and sat across from me while I told her about Tiffany. She did not say anything immediately. She poured the wine. She drank some of it. She said, with the particular Renee Castle quality of dark precision, 3. After a moment, 1 was a mistake, 2 was a choice, 3 is a business model. I made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite the other thing. She refilled my glass. How are you actually doing? After a pause. I don't know. I think the part of me that would normally be devastated has been replaced by a part of me that is just working the problem. Good. Keep doing that. You can fall apart later when there's nothing left to fall apart about. What's the timeline on the estate? The will needs to be filed within 30 days of death. That window closes next Friday. Our estate attorney is filing this week. And the LLC? The house? Assets transferred to an LLC within 3 years of death are potentially subject to clawback in certain states. I need a forensic accountant. I already have a name. There she is. The meeting with Natalie on Thursday was the conversation I had been both dreading and approaching with the specific forward momentum of someone who knows it is necessary and would rather walk through it than around it. She was already in the corner booth when I arrived, with a mug of coffee clasped in both hands and the slightly braced look of someone who has been preparing for a difficult situation and is not sure the preparation was sufficient. She was smaller in person than she had seemed at the funeral, or perhaps grief had made her look larger before. Oliver was not with her. She had mentioned in a text that her mother was watching him, that she thought it was better if it was just the 2 of us. I sat down. Peg appeared, refilled Natalie's coffee, brought me a cup without being asked. We looked at each other. After a moment, with a directness that I had decided was kinder than anything soft. "I want to start by saying that I don't believe you knew about me." She held my gaze. "I didn't. I swear to you, I had no idea you existed. He told me he'd been married briefly years ago, that it was a mistake, that he was careful now about—" She stopped. "That he was careful now about who he committed to. He told me you were a brief relationship from before we met, that it had ended badly and he didn't like to discuss it." With something behind her eyes that was not quite horror, because horror requires surprise. He had a story for both of us. He had a story for everyone. I laid the legal pad on the table between us. I had made notes, names, dates, facts, a rough timeline of what I had confirmed and what I was still trying to confirm. I had done the same at work many times, for women sitting across from attorneys being told about their own lives. There was something deeply strange about being on this side of the table. Natalie looked at the legal pad. She said, very quietly, "He told me his mother loved me. She came to your house. She watched Oliver. She came for his birthdays, both of them. She brought him a rocking horse when he was 1. She told me she was so happy he'd found someone." She stopped. "She told me she was happy, like she meant it. I think she did mean it. I think she was capable of meaning it for both of us at the same time, which requires a kind of moral architecture I don't fully understand." Natalie stared at her coffee for a moment. Then she said, flat, with an anger she had been sitting on, "She knew. She sat at my table and ate the dinners I cooked and watched my son call her grandma, and she knew." "Yes. What are you going to do about it?" "Meeting actually why I wanted to meet. Because some of what needs to happen requires both of us." She was quiet for a moment. I could see the calculation in her expression, the entirely reasonable wariness of a woman who had no particular reason to trust me, who had every reason to see me as a threat or an adversary, and who was trying to figure out what category I actually belonged to. "Oliver has rights," she said. "He's Daniel's son. Yes, he's legally entitled to a share of the estate as a biological heir. That's not something I'm going to contest." Another pause. Something shifted in her face. "You're a paralegal. Family law." She absorbed this. Might have been a laugh in another context. "Of course you are," with an honesty I hadn't planned to offer. "I have spent years helping women do exactly what needs to happen here, and I missed every single sign in my own marriage." She looked at me for a moment with the specific attention of someone who is recalibrating what they thought they knew about you. "I thought I was the secondary one. I thought, when I saw you at the funeral, I thought you were the real one, and I was the mistake." We were both the real one. That was the point. That was how it worked. She looked at her coffee cup. She said, almost to herself, "He told me, when Oliver was born, that he had never felt anything like it, that he understood what love was for the first time. He cried. I saw him cry." After a moment, and I meant it, "I believe that. I think he was capable of that. I think that's possibly the most awful part." We sat for a moment with the terrible logic of that sentence. Then Natalie said, slowly, with a careful, building decision in her voice, "What do you need from me?" What I needed from Natalie Cross was documentation. Specifically, the wedding she had believed in. Daniel had given her a ring, not a legal marriage ceremony, he had told her. They'd do the paperwork when the timing was right, which it never was, which I now understood was a deliberate choice. But a ceremony. He had organized it himself at a small venue with 8 of their friends. Natalie had photographs. She had the ring. She had correspondence, texts, emails, in which he referred to her explicitly as his wife. These were not legal documentation of a marriage, but they were documentation of a financial and emotional fraud of a particular kind, and combined with what I had, the LLC, the shell company, the house, the expense account manipulation, they formed a picture that any attorney worth their retainer could work with in the context of the estate. I called our estate attorney, Joan Wexler, on Friday morning. Joan was 62, wore her silver hair in a severe bun, and had the manner of a person who had spent 40 years being surprised by nothing. She had done Daniel's and my will 3 years ago. She listened to my summary of the situation, delivered in precisely the order of most important to least, the way I had learned to present case information, and was quiet for a moment when I finished. I'm going to need a second cup of coffee for this one, with a steadiness I had worked on. I need to know what the estate looks like with the LLC assets included. I need to know whether the house in Milford can be clawed back. And I need to know what Oliver Cross Mercer is legally entitled to. Without hesitation. All fair questions. Get me everything you have, and I'll get you a full picture by Wednesday. And Claire, she paused, have you thought about whether you want to include the firm's forensic accountant? Because if he was running money through that LLC, there may be tax implications, and I want someone to look at the full picture before the estate closes. I already called someone. She starts Monday. Joan said, with the tone of quiet approval she used for people who had done their homework. Good. The week before the estate settlement meeting was the longest of the process. Not emotionally, because emotionally the worst had been the funeral and the phone in the gym bag. Those 2 particular nights when the architecture had first shown itself. But in the way that waiting is always longer when you know what is coming. I had arranged everything I could arrange. Joan had the documents. The forensic accountant, a woman named Paige Hollister who wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and had the quiet intensity of someone who genuinely enjoyed finding things that had been hidden, had the bank records. Natalie had provided everything I had asked for and had retained her own attorney, a colleague of Joan's whom I had recommended, because the 2 situations were related but distinct, and she needed independent representation. Eleanor Mercer had been notified of the estate proceedings through her own attorney, Marcus Taft, Daniel's college friend, the one who had said, "Oh, Christ," at the funeral and then disappeared into the crowd, had been less easy to locate, but I had located him. He had received a letter from Joan Wexler requesting his testimony regarding the extent of his knowledge of DM Consulting LLC and Daniel's second household. His attorney had called Joan and requested a conversation. That conversation was ongoing. The night before the settlement meeting, I could not sleep. This was not unusual. I had not slept well since February, since the state trooper at my door and the cold front steps and all the nights that followed. But this particular sleeplessness was different. It was not grief, not shock, not the grinding confusion of a story that doesn't make sense. It was the kind of wakefulness that comes before something definitive. The kind you feel at 4 a.m. when you know what is going to happen tomorrow, and you are simply waiting for the clock. I got up at 4:30 and made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table where I had sat the night I found the second phone, where I had sat across from Renee a dozen times in the past 6 weeks, where Daniel had sat every weekend morning and made eggs and talked about his week with the ease of a person who was entirely present. I thought about ease. I thought about how thoroughly a person can construct presence as a performance, can make you feel seen without actually seeing you, can inhabit a table and leave no evidence of what they were thinking. I thought about the first year of our marriage, the year that looked, in the chronology I now had, as the year Daniel was establishing the Milford House, setting up the LLC, arranging the infrastructure of the parallel life. That year, we had gone to Portugal for 10 days in June, a trip that had been Daniel's idea, that he had planned with enthusiasm and attention to detail. The small hotel he had researched, the specific restaurant on the second night where he had somehow reserved the best table. I had thought, this is a man who wants to be here with me. I had felt that. And I had not been entirely wrong, I don't think. I think he had wanted to be there. I think he wanted to be everywhere, which is another way of saying he was not fully anywhere, which is another way of saying that the charm and the attention and the careful planning were real and false at the same time, which is the specific madness of this kind of deception. It does not give you the clean comfort of a lie you can identify. It gives you something that was partially true and leaves you trying to measure the fraction. There was a legal pad on the table, not the working one, which was full of notes and cross-references and dates, but a clean one I had taken from the stack. I thought about writing something, what I would say in the morning, what I needed the room to understand. I did not write anything down in the end, because the words I needed were already fully formed. I had been carrying them for 8 weeks, and they did not require rehearsal. What they required was tomorrow. On the table in front of me was Daniel's wallet. The funeral home had returned it with his other personal effects. The Seiko watch my father's brand had made and Daniel had worn every day, his wedding ring, a small pocket calendar he had used for handwritten notes, and the wallet, brown leather, worn at the corners from 6 years in his back pocket. I had not opened it until now. Inside, credit cards, his license, a folded receipt from a gas station in Westfield from 3 months before he died, his gym membership card, $23 in cash, and behind the cash, in the slot designed for loyalty cards, 2 photographs. The first was ours, our wedding day, October, the small venue, 43 guests. In the photo, we were standing outside, just before going in, and I was laughing at something he had said, and he was looking at me with the particular focused attention that I had always interpreted as love. I still interpreted it as love. I think it was love, in whatever form he was capable of. I think love and deception were not, for Daniel Mercer, mutually exclusive categories. The second photograph was Natalie and Oliver, taken in front of the house in Milford on what appeared to be a summer day, both of them squinting slightly in the sun, Oliver maybe 2 years old, wearing a striped shirt with a small boat on the pocket. Natalie was laughing. Oliver had his arms out like he was about to run somewhere. It was, objectively, a beautiful photograph of 2 people who were happy. He had carried both. In the same wallet, in the same slot, both photographs together for however long it had been since he put them there. I sat with the wallet for a long time. I thought about what it meant to carry 2 photographs, whether it was the evidence of a particular cruelty or a particular grief, or perhaps both at once, indistinguishable. Whether he had known, somewhere underneath the architecture of the lie, that it could not last, and whether the photographs were a kind of private admission of that. I did not know. I would never know. He had gone into the ground with the answer. I took my photograph out of the wallet. I left the other one. I closed the wallet, set it on the table, and I sat with my coffee in the kitchen of the house I had bought with my husband and would shortly begin the process of selling. And I thought about what I was going to say in the morning. And when I had finished thinking about it, I was not afraid. The estate settlement meeting was held at Joan Wexler's office on the 17th floor of a building downtown, in a conference room with a long table and a view of the river that I had always found either peaceful or indifferent, depending on my mood. I arrived first. I arranged the documents I had brought in the order I would need them. I poured a glass of water. I waited. Eleanor Mercer arrived with her attorney, a man named Pemberton, who had the slightly defensive precision of someone who knows his client is on the wrong side of the facts and has decided that manner will have to substitute for evidence. Eleanor herself was in the same pale blue sweater she had been wearing when I visited her. She looked tired. Not the grief tired I recognized from my own mirror, but the specific exhaustion of someone who has been holding something for too long and has not been permitted to put it down. She did not look at me when she came in. She sat at the far end of the table and set her hands flat on the surface, which was either composure or an attempt at it. Joan Wexler entered with Paige Hollister beside her and a young associate carrying 2 boxes of documents. Natalie Cross's attorney, a woman named Dana Chu, who had the quiet precision that good family attorneys learn or die by, arrived separately and nodded to me across the table with the small professional acknowledgement of 2 people who are on the same side of an argument without being on the same side of the table. What followed was 4 hours of what I can only describe as the methodical dismantling of a structure that had been built to survive inspection by people who knew exactly where the bolts were. Paige Hollister presented the financial findings with the flat clarity of someone who finds satisfaction in the numbers themselves. The LLC, the house in Milford, the expense account inflation, the 3-year transfer of marital assets into a separate entity, $340,000 in total by conservative accounting, moved from Daniel's income into infrastructure that supported a household his legal wife did not know existed. The numbers were precise, the timeline was documented, and the documentation had been assembled with a meticulousness that I will admit I was responsible for, because I knew what to look for, and I had looked for it, with the specific intention of not missing anything. Eleanor's attorney attempted several objections. Joan Wexler addressed each one with the particular economy of someone who has heard them all before and knows exactly where they lead. At one point, Pemberton said, with a formality intended to project authority, "My client wishes it noted that her son's intentions were," from Joan, without looking up from her notes, "his intentions are not relevant to the disposition of assets that were transferred in violation of the marital estate. What is relevant is the transfer amount and the timeline, both of which have been documented. Moving on." Eleanor Mercer said nothing. She had said nothing for 3 hours. She sat at the end of the table with her hands flat on the surface and her eyes somewhere in the middle distance, and she looked like a woman in the process of understanding that the structure she had helped build had not, as she had perhaps hoped, collapsed with Daniel. It had collapsed onto her. There was one moment in 4 hours, when she and I looked directly at each other. It was after Paige Hollister finished presenting the expense account findings, and Joan asked me if I had anything to add to the documentation. I looked up from my notes. Eleanor was already looking at me, the specific quality of someone who has decided to be accurate rather than merciful. "I told you I work in family law," I said. "I've spent years helping women find exactly what you just heard. I want you to understand that I did not miss those signs because I was naive. I missed them because the people around him, the people who knew, who were asked to keep his secret, did their jobs very well." Eleanor's chin moved, not quite a nod, not quite a refusal, something in between. I want you to understand that Oliver is going to be taken care of, that Natalie is going to be taken care of. Not because Daniel built it that way, because I'm building it this way. And I want you to understand that I'm doing that not for him and not for you, but because a 4-year-old child did not design this situation. Silence. Very low, cracked at the edges. He was my son. I know, which was all I had for that, which was, I decided, enough. The settlement took the full 4 hours and required 2 follow-up sessions in subsequent weeks to formalize. The outcome, in summary, the Milford House, registered under DM Consulting LLC, was determined to be a marital asset subject to division. After legal fees and estate costs, the equity in both properties was sufficient to provide for both the primary household and a meaningful trust for Oliver. The expense account fraud was referred to Daniel's former employer for their own separate investigation. That was not my fight, but it meant the full accounting of what he had done was on the record. Marcus Taff, Daniel's college friend who had known for 3 years and said nothing, provided a deposition and was not in a position to offer much beyond confirmation of what I already knew. I chose not to pursue him further, because the cost, in time, in energy, was greater than the return, and I had made a decision to invest my resources in what could be built rather than what had to be burned. Eleanor Mercer paid the attorney's fees that her involvement had necessitated. She sold a piece of investment property to do so. I know this not because I was watching, but because these things become known, the way everything eventually becomes known, through the ordinary channels of a small community. 8 months later, I am sitting at the kitchen table with the morning light coming through the windows in the particular way it does in October, when the angle is low and the leaves on the maple have turned, and the whole thing looks, briefly, like a painting of something I am not yet ready to stop looking at. The house has been sold. I am living, for now, in a rented apartment 3 blocks from the office, close enough to walk, which I do every morning, which is the kind of small reclaiming that turns out to matter. The running club still meets on Saturdays. We still run the 5-mile loop, and we still go to Sunrise Grill after, and Peg still puts my toast in front of me before I ask. Renee ran a half marathon in September and refused to be humble about it. Donna is growing tomatoes on her balcony, badly, and updating us weekly. Beth is learning Italian from an app, also badly, and updating us almost as frequently. Marguerite continues to drink orange juice and maintain that it is medicinal. I spoke to Natalie Cross last week, which is the 3rd time since the settlement finalized. We are not friends. I do not think we will become friends, because the thing we have in common is not a foundation for friendship. It is more like a scar tissue you can acknowledge without making it the substance of a relationship. But we are something, some category of women who survived the same specific disaster and came out the other side still standing, each in our own direction. She has gone back to using Cross. Oliver is doing well. She tells me he asks for his grandfather less now, which she says is both a relief and a small new grief. I understand that combination. I have several of my own. I have thought, more times than I can count, about the thing that took the longest to assemble. Not the financial picture, not the timeline, but the network. The people who knew. Not just Eleanor, not just Marcus, but Daniel's college friend who had hosted them in Savannah. Daniel's assistant who had known to book hotels under the consulting company's account. The colleague who had vouched for a conference that wasn't one. None of them had designed the lie. None of them had made Daniel into who he was. But each of them, at various points, had made a choice. The choice of silence, the choice of convenience, the choice to look away from something that would have been very uncomfortable to look at directly. And each of those choices had been a brick in the architecture that had kept me inside a story I didn't know I was in. The horror is never just what happened. The horror is who made it possible, who saw it and said nothing, who looked at a woman eating dinner at a table and knew she was eating inside a lie and offered her the bread anyway. That is the part I carry, and the part I am learning to put down, with the specific patience of a person who knows you cannot put something down until you've named it. I finished the coffee. I washed the mug. I pulled on my coat, not the gray one. I had donated the gray one. And I took my keys from the hook by the door, and I walked out into the October morning and locked the door behind me. The light on the street was low and gold and cold and entirely indifferent, in the good way, in the way of things that exist regardless of your story. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, feeling it. I had been practicing not making a scene for 6 years. I was done practicing. I walked to work.